So, once again, it's been a short while, but we are back with another edition of our Klub Outside Q&A Round-up series. As always, Kubo takes and answers a variety of questions directly from fans over on his personal Q&A platform, and then we, right here, try to dissect those answers and see if there's anything of value to be found. Having pumped the brakes on these for a bit while the anime was releasing, I think we've built up quite the backlog now of questions and answers to look at, but how valuable they'll be, well, we'll have to decide that on an individual basis. Speaking of which, a lot of the time Kubo's comments are a mix of light-hearted chatter and fluff, but sometimes we are given real, genuine insight into the story and world of Bleach that for whatever reason simply wasn't found in the original material. And as always, I'm not going to be looking at every single answer he's ever given, nor even necessarily looking at them in chronological order. Mostly I'm trying to curate the answers that I find to be interesting and to have the most value when I then bring the discussion to you. And so, this time the questions revolve around Yamamoto joining Squad Zero, Ichigo's time abroad, the contents of Askin's sandwich? And more. A huge thank you to M Shadows for providing the translations to the questions and answers as always. There's a link in the description to where you too can find them, so make sure to check them out and show your appreciation as well. It really is a lot of work and it's greatly appreciated. Right, on with the latest roundup. We'll begin with the topic of whether or not Yamamoto was ever invited to join the Zero Division. However guys, once you're done with the video, if you enjoyed it and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, make sure to do that now by hitting the button down below and helping us reach our next milestone of 300,000 subs. I really would appreciate all of the help, and your support does mean the absolute world to me, so thank you all very much. So, after what felt like an eternity of build-up and anticipation, we were finally introduced to the near-mythical Zero Division, the Royal Guard, early into the Thousand-Year Blood War arc when they descended from heaven to help restore the Soul Society after the devastating First Quincy invasion. During the subsequent time we spent then with the Zero Division, we quickly learned a lot about them, about the individual members, their ways, their traditions, and more. But perhaps the single most vital piece of information that we learned, however, and something that had been speculated on for years at this point, was how one actually joins the Zero Division. Back in the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, when we first learned of this special Royal Guard, this special Zero Division outside of that really random mention back in chapter 60-something, when Rukia talks about them taking on the Menos Grande, we learned that Kiryu Hikifune had been mysteriously promoted to the Soul King's personal guard, sequestered away forevermore in the royal palace high above, and at last, almost a full 200 chapters later, we finally discovered why. For the longest time, we thought it must simply be a matter of power, that somehow these chosen few were by far the strongest Shinigami who ever lived. And in chapter 516, when Kyoraku introduced them as having power greater than the entire Gotei 13, well, we thought that that theory had just been confirmed. But it turned out to not be the case, and instead, the criteria for promotion was actually a lot more interesting than expected. Each member of the Zero Division is a Shinigami who has contributed something of significance to the history of the Soul Society. Kurinji Tenjiro is the inventor of Kaido, the healing branch of Kido. A little bit confusing that the actual inventor of Kido itself isn't here, but there you go, while the aforementioned Kiryu Hikifune created the Gikon, the artificial soul. Although never revealed in the manga, though I think you could have probably inferred this yourself, the light novel Can't Fear Your Own World revealed that Shutara Senjumaru's creation was the Shihakusho, a fact later corroborated by Kubo himself as part of his Klub Outside trivia. Oetsu Nimaya invented the Asauchi, the basis for all Zanpakuto, while Ichibei Hyosobe is the one who named virtually every single phenomenon in the Soul Society itself, including Zanpakuto, Shikai, and Bankai. Which brings us to Shigekuni Yamamoto, a hugely influential Shinigami and the founder of the Gotei 13 itself. Before we knew the truth about promotion to the Zero Division, many wondered why a Shinigami so astronomically powerful as Yamamoto didn't make their ranks, with the prevailing theory being that he turned down an invitation to run the Gotei instead. Once that theory was debunked and it became about their inventions, their contributions to the history of Soul Society, well, the same question arose again. And surely the Gotei 13 itself as a historical contribution is worthy of promotion. Well, someone asked Kubo that very question, and it reads, was Yamamoto ever invited to join the Zero Squad? Being the founder of the Gotei 13 should count towards having created something, right? And Kubo replied, he was never considered. It's not to say that there hadn't been any organised units of soldiers before them. I'll be honest, this answer surprises me, and not only does it surprise me, but I kind of don't buy into the reasoning whatsoever. The Gotei 13, as an entity, really isn't enough to warrant even a consideration for the Zero Division? That seems like, to be frank, a load of rubbish to me. I'll be completely upfront with you. Kubo notes that there had been organised units of soldiers before them, as if that somehow invalidates Yamamoto's claim to the Zero Division, but how many of those so-called organised units, based on what we know, by the way, of the Soul Society prior to the creation of the Gotei 13, they would have likely amounted to little more than loose-knit bands of thugs and criminals and villains. How many of those organised units went on to shape the entire modern-day society of the Soul Society as we know it moving forward? I mean, I'm not exaggerating, there's no hyperbole there, as you well know. The Gotei 13 essentially forms the foundation of the entire Shinigami existence as we know it, for the majority of them at least. Those Shinigami who happen to exist outside of the system of the Gotei 13 are really limited to aristocracy, and then those that happen to join a different branch of the Soul Society military, something like the Kido Corps or the Omnitz Kido. Outside of that, as far as we're aware, virtually every single Shinigami ends up in the Gotei 13. Sure, while the Gotei 13 is technically only the military arm of the Soul Society, it is the Gotei 13 that deals with, well, almost everything to do with the job of being a Shinigami, of being an officer. They are in many ways one and the same, whether that's the fundamental role of protecting humans from hollows and purifying hollows, to much bigger threats like countering a massive Quincy invasion. The Gotei 13 is at the very heart of the Soul Society itself. Whether it was always intended to be this way or not, I don't know, but it does seem like the very basis of what it means to be a Shinigami has all been rolled into the Gotei 13. Now, whether or not that's a good thing is completely up for interpretation. Due to the Gotei 13's reigning influence over essentially day-to-day life of the Shinigami, the Soul Society itself then is ostensibly a military force, run by the Gotei 13 in many ways, outside of perhaps the Central 46, that seems to be really the only body that has any control over the Shinigami of the 13 court guards. But there's no denying that the Gotei 13 is an absolutely massive contribution to the Soul Society's history. Where are these other supposed organised fighting units now, today? Either long destroyed and disbanded, barely a footnote in Soul Society history, or, probably likelier, assimilated into the wider Gotei 13 over the generations. I mean, this is a towering, hierarchical society unto itself that has persisted for over a millennium. A society that the vast majority of Shinigami enter into, whether through application or even the intertwining of Soul Society aristocracy as seen with the Kuchiki clan and the Shihoin clan and others. When someone says that they want to become a Shinigami, as we see with the likes of Rukia and Renji and Gin, for all intents and purposes, they are saying they want to become a member of the Gotei 13. As readers, Our perception, then, of the Soul Society is shaped almost entirely by the Gotei 13 and its influence. Its iconography is all over the place, to the point where they are practically one and the same, even if that's not wholly accurate. There's no two ways about it. To state that not only was Yamamoto not considered, but to reduce the Gotei 13's impact down to, well, there were other organised fighting units in the past, seems absolutely mad to me, and it's quite likely that we just don't know the full picture. I suppose the only way it makes sense is if we consider a couple of facts. Maybe an organisation on the same size and scale, or at least similar to the Gotei 13, existed at some point in the past way before the Gotei 13, and then crumbled and fell like an empire rising and falling. I guess that's totally possible, and so maybe something like the Gotei 13 is just one of many, and perhaps the powers that be expect that to fall at some point as well. But I guess the only other way it makes sense, and this kind of plays into that last point I just made, is that if we consider the fact that 1,000 years isn't a particularly long time in the grand scheme of things, and so maybe the Gotei 13 is seen on the wider scale as a very infinitesimal speck on the Soul Society's greater history. But, I mean, even so, just look at the other inventions. We don't really have enough information pertaining to the broader timeline to know for sure the actual impact the Asauchi had on the shaping of the Gotei 13 itself. But the Shihakusho? For Senjumaru to be considered over Yamamoto, presumably it's been around for a long time, much longer than the Gotei 13, and symbolises the Soul Society more than it does the uniform of the Gotei 13, even though again it is almost ubiquitous in meaning that today. But then that barely makes sense either, as Senjumaru was a part of the Gotei 13 before being promoted. So when exactly did she create the Shihakusho, and for what purpose other than to be the uniform for the Gotei 13, to be used solely by the Gotei 13? And if that's the case, then how is she getting promoted over the Gotei 13's actual founder? The same kind of goes for the Geekon as well. Hikifune was only promoted 100 years prior to the main storyline, which is absolutely nothing in Shinigami time. But surely Geekon were being used prior to that, as that's how most Shinigami operate in the human world, if using a Gigai, for example, which feels like a pretty fundamental aspect to the way they work. But again, that could be a very modern-day invention. And if so, does it really warrant a promotion already, especially over the Gotei 13, the very society that Hikifune herself was embedded in? That's another point too. Many of these characters, Senjumaru and Hikifune for example, were literally a part of this wider organisation before being promoted from within, and yet the actual founder of said organisation doesn't get recognised? To make matters even worse, not only did Yamamoto found the Gotei 13, but he also founded the Shinigami Academy, essentially making him directly responsible for the path most fledgling Shinigami take from a very young age. Seriously, if you want to become a Shinigami, Yamamoto effectively has a hand in your entire destiny. You must first study at the academy that Yamamoto himself founded, an educational institution that now sets the vast majority of prospective Shinigami onto their respective paths, before ending up in the Gotei 13, an appointment that is for life, by the way, again founded by this one man. If the creation of the Gotei 13 doesn't warrant a promotion, what about the Academy? While I can understand, to a degree, that the history of the Soul Society has likely been littered with these so-called organised fighting mobs, it seems like the concept of an academy feels very modern by comparison, a way for Yamamoto and his legions to break free of their bloodletting past. In a sense, even though the initial, original Gotei 13 was made up of these brutal, villainous, murderous thugs, it still feels like the start of a whole new era for the Soul Society itself. What's even weirder as well is that the Zero Division regularly reference Yamamoto himself, and in the new flashback present in episode 24 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime, Ichigo even seems to be acting as an envoy of sorts of the Gotei 13, which is in its original incarnation at the time. So you're telling me that Ichigo never sat down with Yamamoto and was like, this is pretty amazing what you've done, as he watched what would be the future of the Shinigami laid bare before him for generations to come to this very day. Honestly, I would have had a much easier time believing it if Kubo had just said that Yamamoto had declined the invitation. But maybe I'm off base here. Maybe the Gotei 13 and to a lesser extent the Shinigami Academy don't deserve consideration by the Zero Division. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know down in the comments, because this one is a little infuriating, to be honest. I'm kind of surprised that the Gotei 13 would not warrant such an extension when, in my opinion, seemingly lesser inventions did. I don't know, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to get some insight from you guys as well. Before we move on to the next topic, just a quick interjection here to remind you guys to check out my second channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. I just put out another video yesterday where I discuss what I think were the best games of 2024, a year that's been called quite a slow year in gaming by many. So I'd love for you to check out my list, get your thoughts over there as well, and maybe hit subscribe if you like what you see. I'm trying to get the channel to 10,000 subs by the end of January. I'm not sure we're going to make it, but regardless, we're giving it a good push. So if you want to be part of that, then I really would appreciate your support. But anyway, let's crack on with the rest of these questions and answers. So, moving on, we have a much less contentious topic to look at now. While the vast majority of the time span between the end of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc and Chapter 685 is completely missing, something I'm hoping might be filled in at least a little in the anime, hopefully the direct aftermath of the war at least. We do know a bit about the new adult lives of our main characters. Specifically in the Hell chapter, when Rangiku asks Ichigo what his job is, he reveals that he is currently a translator. Well, a reader wanted to learn a little more about that and asked Kubo the following question. 10 years later, after becoming an adult, we learn that Ichigo now works as a translator. Did he study abroad or something in order to deepen his language skills? Now, we already know that Ichigo translates Japanese into English and vice versa thanks to a much earlier Klub Outside question, but to add a little more detail, Kubo revealed the following, saying, he studied in the UK. That's pretty cool. I also studied English in the UK. Maybe we could have bumped into each other at some point. But in all seriousness, this is a neat detail. And what's really got people talking, of course, is the association with Kubo's other series. The ongoing, though long dormant, Burn the Witch, which I think is supposed to be getting a second manga season at some point, though I don't know when, since it's been a few years now. But of course, Burn the Witch is set here in England, specifically in Reverse London, where the West Branch of the Soul Society is located. The revelation that the witches were operating out of their own version of the Soul Society was a huge twist at the end of the pilot chapter, and of course opened the door to there being various different soul societies all across the world. So, the question is, while studying in the UK, did Ichigo happen to notice any sign of this unusual activity? Again, while Reverse London is the headquarters of the West Branch, it seems likely that, like the original Soul Society, the witches operate all over the country, and if dragons are indeed similar to hollows in existence and function, then maybe Ichigo caught sight of them at one point or another. For all we know, in the aftermath of the Great Soul King War, the West Branch of the Soul Society already knows who Ichigo is. He did save the entire universe, after all, and news probably travels fast, and maybe they reached out to him upon realising he was coming to the UK. Anyway, there's not too much to say here, but it is a cool little detail, and maybe the basis for a potential crossover to come in the future? It seems unlikely, but the thought is there, and Ichigo has now canonically found himself squarely within the witches' domain that is the UK, which is interesting in itself. Okay, so up next we have another question about Quilge OP? Honestly, I'm all for it. Quilge is clearly one of the best sternritter, and he always has been. But this is unprecedented. Quilge has to be the first character in Bleach history to be almost fully fleshed out entirely through Klub Outside write-ins and answers. I think there's been at least 3 on him to date, maybe even more, I'm not certain, but Kubo clearly likes him, as well, as he's always got a lot more to say. And hilariously, we've reached the point where we have our own little Klub Outside continuity forming here. Quilge was never revealed to be the combat tutor of the new sternritter recruits in the manga, only in Klub Outside, and here, Kubo is following on from that almost directly. What I'm saying here is that for this to make the most sense, you don't need prior manga knowledge, you need prior Klub Outside knowledge now. Anyway, a reader asked Kubo the following question, saying, Quilge never got to interact with the other sternritter, but is there anyone he was close with? I'm curious if he had any admirers or anything like that. And Kubo replied as such, saying, Quilge is strict with his students, but great when it comes to taking care of them. So, even though he is eccentric and a pain to deal with, he is regarded as someone with great skill and reliable. Most of his students would at least address him as Mr. I'll be completely honest again, I have a hard time imagining Quilge being particularly great at taking care of anyone, unless Kubo means in regards to actually training them, readying them for battle. So rather than being a particularly caring teacher, perhaps it just means that he is very effective at engineering skilled soldiers. But I can imagine him filling their heads with all sorts of propaganda and dogma while being ruthlessly strict with them. It also makes me wonder just how much training did Quilge oversee? Was he only responsible for training sternritter, or did his training also branch out, and did he oversee the training of regular soldat and officers as well? For example, when he callously kills that Quincy who was running back to him during the battle with the Fraction, did he know that man? Perhaps Quilge had drilled into his soldiers the idea of never retreating, never turning your back on your foe, and never asking for help, and to fail in such a way deserved death. Interestingly, you can kind of follow this line of thought into later on in his fight, when he's being overwhelmed with Ichigo. Quilge briefly considers asking for backup, but then relents, thinking that if he were to do that, he trails off, but it's pretty obvious that he would be seriously reprimanded or maybe even killed for doing so. Regardless, I appreciate that he was respected by his fellow Sternritter and Wandenreich members, and yes, to that end, I always got the impression that even Yamamoto had a bit of respect for him too. Putting him in charge of the entire Waco Mundo operation is a fairly big deal after all, and of course Yamamoto anticipates Quilge of being capable of holding even Ichigo up for long enough to actually allow them to begin their invasion into the Soul Society. As the question notes, I do wish we'd seen Quilge interacting with other Sternritter, which is why it would have been fantastic to see him crop up in the Friend flashback, for example, or any of these new flashbacks in the anime, and I guess it could still happen in Core 4. But alas, for now, we're just going to have to make do with his constant appearances on Klub Outside. And finally, as always, we'll end this installment of the Klub Outside Q&A Roundup with a more light-hearted entry. And well, this time, it is some truly hard-hitting news. A reader approached Kubo with the following question, asking, please tell us what Askin had in the sandwich he was eating while observing Kenpachi and Gremmy's battle from afar. To which Kubo replied, ham, cucumber, and mustard. Yes, please Kubo, tell us what is in the sandwich of mystery. Look, I'm about as big an Askin fan as can be, but I'm not sure we needed to know this. And to make matters even worse, the shot featuring the sandwich in question was actually removed in the anime. But let's briefly break this sandwich down and go through this thing ingredient by ingredient. I like ham. In a sandwich, out of a sandwich, that's a no-brainer and an all-round solid foundation for the lunch item of Askin's choice. I like cucumber, but I'm not sure how I feel about its place in a sandwich. Wouldn't that just get the bread all soggy? I'm not vibing with cucumber in a sandwich, to be honest, and I'm trying to think if I've ever actually had cucumber in a sandwich before, like a sandwich, not a baguette or something like that. And honestly, I can't recall. But although I think the flavours of cucumber and ham would probably go together perfectly nicely, in fact, I'm almost certain I have had that before, I would probably say no to cucumber being in the sandwich in this particular instance. And then mustard. Well, I'm not big on mustard in general. It depends what kind of mustard we're talking about, but even then, it's not really a sandwich item for me. It's a very specific item used in very specific circumstances. The home of mustard is on a burger, which I guess, in essence, is a type of sandwich. The hell am I even talking about at this point? Well, now we know what Askin was eating. Why did they decide to remove the picnic basket from the anime? I honestly don't know, but it might be the most egregious cut in the Thousand Year Blood War Arc anime to date. Anyway, that's it for another installment of the Klub Outside Q&A Roundup series. As always, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you enjoyed the topics on discussion here. Let me know down in the comments below what was your favourite topic to be looked at this time. How do you feel about Yamamoto being skipped over for an invitation to the Zero Division despite creating both the Gotei 13 and the Shinigami Academy? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that in particular down in the comments below. What do you think about Ichigo and a potential Burn the Witch crossover? Is this hinting at that? Probably not, but what would you like to see from that in the future? How do you feel about more Kyogre information in Klub Outside? And of course, what do you think about the components of Askin's sandwich? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. That's it from me though, guys. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to check out Mr. Tomo Talks Games on my latest video over there. My favourite games of 2024. I'd love to hear your favourites down in the comments below as well. And stay tuned for the 25 games I want to play in 2025. It's going to be a stacked year, so we're going to be pretty busy, and I really would appreciate all of your support. But thank you again so very much, guys. As always, I want to end by saying an enormous thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without whom I simply wouldn't be able to do this, especially here in January, which is not a great month for YouTube. As always, if you do choose to support me that extra step further over on YouTube at the $1 tier a month, you'll get your name in the credits of every video just like this, and at the $2 tier or higher, you can enjoy every one of my videos absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Okay, everyone, once again, thanks so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.